All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling a big one. Ecclesiastes. You know that book from the Old Testament that really makes you think about life's meaning, the purpose of it all?
Yeah, it grapples with those big questions like, what are we even doing here? Questions that people have been asking, well, probably since people started thinking, really.
And it's a book that you, dear listener, specifically asked for us to unpack, so we're going to do our best to break down those core ideas.
We'll give it a shot.
Now, it's a pretty dense book, Ecclesiastes, and to do it justice, I think we should try to give a good overview of, well, the whole thing.
Sounds good to me.
So first things first, the book is framed as the words of, well, the preacher. And traditionally, it's attributed to King Solomon.
Ah, Solomon.
Right. Famous for his wisdom, wealth, and let's just say a pretty full life experience.
Exactly. And all that really sets the stage because he's not speaking from some ivory tower. This is someone who seems to have experienced pretty much everything the world has to offer. And then he comes out with that famous line, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity."
Not exactly what you'd expect from a king, is it? It's almost like he's saying, I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and it's all, well, pointless.
Well, yeah, the word that gets translated as vanity, it's the Hebrew hevel, and that word, it's more nuanced than just meaningless. It's more like a mist or a breath, something you can't grasp, like trying to hold on to smoke. And that really sets the tone for the whole book, pointing to how fleeting things are, how they ultimately don't really satisfy.
Okay, so right from the start, we're in for a journey that's really going to make us question everything we think we know about what makes life worthwhile, huh? Not exactly a pep talk.
No, not exactly a pep talk, but that's what makes Ecclesiastes so powerful, right? It doesn't shy away from the hard questions. And this theme of Hevel, well, it continues through those first couple of chapters. The preacher, he talks about pursuing wisdom, building projects, amassing wealth, even indulging in music and entertainment.
It's almost comical, isn't it, how over the top he goes with it all. It's like he's trying every single avenue to find lasting fulfillment.
Oh, yeah, he really does. He describes building houses, planting vineyards. He even talks about getting singers and musicians, like the whole 9 yards.
I mean, if that doesn't do it, what will?
Right. And yet he concludes that his heart, it still feels empty. Like he keeps hitting this wall, this sense of like chasing after the wind, striving and striving, but ultimately grasping at something you can't hold on to.
It really makes you think.
Oh,
So that brings us to the first big question, right? If those things, success, wealth, pleasure, if those don't bring satisfaction, then what does?
Yeah, and that question, well, it really hangs over the rest of the book. But then in chapter 3, we get that very famous passage, A Time for Everything. It's beautiful poetry, and it explores the cyclical nature of life. All those ups and downs, the joys and sorrows that come with just being alive.
Oh, yeah, that's a really powerful chapter.
It really is. And I think what's so powerful about it is that it's not about, controlling those cycles. It's more about recognizing that they're inevitable.
Accepting them.
Exactly, accepting them and finding meaning within them. Like wisdom comes from flowing with those changes, not trying to resist them.
Okay, so there's a certain acceptance of life's ups and downs, but then things get a bit more, I don't know, maybe more gritty when we get into chapters 4 through 6. He talks about things like loneliness, injustice, and the fact that sometimes even having wealth doesn't mean you'll be happy.
Right. And he uses this really striking image. He talks about an alien eating your riches, which I always found so interesting. Like, it's a reminder that all that material stuff, it doesn't necessarily translate into true wealth or contentment. Makes you wonder what true wealth actually looks like, doesn't it?
It really does. So then in chapter 7, we get into this whole discussion about wisdom. And, with Solomon's reputation, you'd think this would be his happy place.
You would think. But even he says, I said I will be wise, but it was far from me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's acknowledging wisdom's value, but also its limits, It's like he's wrestling with the fact that even with wisdom, you can't fully grasp all the mysteries of life or escape suffering.
And he also grapples with this whole issue of righteousness versus wickedness. Like, how come sometimes it seems like good people suffer while bad people, they seem to get ahead?
Yeah, it's that tension between trying to do the right thing and the reality of human imperfection. It's something I think a lot of people still struggle with today, and it really seems to have troubled the preacher, too.
It does. So, okay, if even wisdom and righteousness don't guarantee a smooth ride, what's the point of even striving for those things?
Yeah.
And that question, it gets even more intense in chapter 8 when we start talking about the power of authority, especially kings.
And remember, this is Solomon speaking, a king himself. He's not just theorizing here, he's lived it. He understands the temptations and limitations of power firsthand.
Right. And he even points out that the pursuit of power can be just as fleeting as any other worldly pursuit. He observes that kings can't control everything. He also notes that sometimes justice is delayed, that sometimes the wicked, well, they seem to get away with their deeds. It's almost like he's saying that systems of power, they can be flawed, unpredictable.
Right, and that can tempt people to do evil if they think they can get away with it. It's a pretty cynical observation, maybe, but I think it resonates with a lot of people today who see injustice happening and they wonder, what's the point of even trying to do the right thing?
Yeah, for sure. And then chapter 9 comes along. And oh boy, it throws a real wrench in the works by bringing us face to face with, well, death. This is where we get that famous eat, drink, and be merry quote, which, by the way, is so often misunderstood.
Oh, yeah, it really is. It's not about just throwing caution to the wind and indulging in whatever you want. It's more like he's saying, hey, life is short. Find joy in the good things while you can, because you never know what tomorrow will bring.
I always love that line, how he says, a living dog is better than a dead lion.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that life, even with all its struggles, it's precious. And we should appreciate the simple fact that we're alive.
Yeah, really makes you think.
It really does, doesn't it? Really puts things in perspective.
It does. And it's not like he's just saying, eat, drink, and be merry and forget everything else. Because in the next couple of chapters, he actually offers some pretty practical advice for, daily living.
Right, yeah. Chapters 10 and 11, it's like he gets down to brass tacks. He's all about making wise choices, even when you're faced with uncertainty. He talks about how dangerous folly can be, how we need to be skillful in our actions. And he even talks about, the importance of generosity.
Oh, yeah. There's that beautiful image of casting your bread upon the waters,
Yeah.
right? Trusting that it'll come back to you someday.
Exactly. That's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? It's about having faith, taking risks, even when you don't know what the outcome's going to be. He's acknowledging that life throws curveballs, but that doesn't mean we should just, sit back and do nothing.
It's a tough balance, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Accepting what you can't control, but still taking action, making choices. And then chapter 12, wow, he takes us on this really poignant journey through aging and that reality of facing death.
Yeah. Chapter 12, the imagery in that chapter, it's so vivid, so striking. When he describes the body declining, the keepers of the house shall tremble and the grinders cease because they are few. It's a stark reminder that even the strongest among us, we all eventually, grow old and frail.
Yeah. And yet, even in the face of that decline, there's that call to, remember your Creator in the days of your youth.
Right. And it's not just about being young. It's about living with this awareness of how fleeting life is.
Making each moment count.
Exactly. Making each moment count. Finding meaning and purpose even as we face our own mortality.
So, wow, we've gone through all 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes. And I got to say, it's a lot to take in. What are your biggest takeaways from the whole book? What really stands out to you?
Well, one thing that really strikes me is, it's not a book that gives you easy answers. Or some neat little philosophy you can just plug into your life.
Yeah, no silver bullet.
No, not at all. It's more like a conversation. It's
Yeah.
wrestling with those big questions about life. And sometimes, the preacher, he seems to contradict himself.
Right, you get these moments of deep pessimism, but then there's also these flashes of, practical wisdom and even a kind of quiet joy. It's a bit of a roller coaster.
It is. And that's what makes it so relatable, right? It's not about presenting some, perfect, consistent worldview. It's about acknowledging how messy and complex human experience really is.
I like that. It's like he's giving us permission to embrace that whole spectrum of emotions.
Yeah.
To say, hey, it's okay to feel confused or frustrated or even angry sometimes.
Yeah. We often try to force life into these neat little boxes, but the preacher, he's like, no, all those feelings, they're part of the journey too.
And another thing that really struck me, despite all that searching and questioning, it doesn't end on a note of despair. There's this sense of acceptance, even peace in those final verses.
Oh, absolutely. It's like he comes back to that familiar refrain, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But this time, it doesn't feel like a defeat. It feels more like a recognition, Like he's finally let go of that illusion that we can control everything, that we can find lasting happiness through external things.
It's really interesting to think about how relevant his observations still are. even though he lived in such a different time and place. I mean, here we are thousands of years later, still wrestling with the same questions about meaning and purpose.
Right. It really speaks to just how timeless the human condition is, you know? Those questions, they're like woven into who we are.
I wonder, if the preacher had access to all of our modern technology, social media, all the distractions and pressures of modern life, would he double down on those conclusions about the fleeting nature of things? Would it be even stronger for him?
Whoa, that's a fascinating thought. Would all that noise and busyness just amplify that feeling of like chasing after the wind? Or would it make those moments of simple joy and connection even more precious?
Yeah, it really makes you think, huh? Like, is it about how we choose to engage with the world? Do we get swept up in that endless cycle of striving and consuming?
Hmm.
Or do we make a conscious effort to appreciate those simple things, the things that truly matter?
I think that's a key takeaway from Ecclesiastes. It's not like a rule book, telling you exactly how to live. It's more like a guide, a companion on your own journey of self-discovery.
Oh, I love that. It's an invitation to keep asking those tough questions, to keep seeking wisdom, and to, find your own unique path to a meaningful life.
It's a real head scratcher, isn't it? What would Solomon say about our world today, with all the craziness?
Right. Like, can you imagine him scrolling through Instagram, seeing everyone's, picture-perfect lives?
Would he just shake his head and say, more vanity, another form of chasing after the wind?
He might. But you know what I find interesting? For a book that really doesn't sugarcoat things, there's still this underlying sense of, I don't know, maybe hope. There is, isn't there? It's like he's saying, look, I've seen it all. The good, the bad, and yeah, the ugly too. And you know what? It's still worth it to find joy right here, right now.
In the present moment, exactly. And with all the noise and distractions we have today, it's easy to lose sight of that.
So easy.
Yeah.
But going back to that idea of hevel, remember, it's not just about things being meaningless. It's about recognizing how fleeting they are. So we don't get sucked into chasing after them.
Right, right.
But how do we apply that, practically? How do we find that balance between savoring the moment, but also knowing it won't last forever?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think Ecclesiastes would tell us there's no one right answer. But it encourages us to keep seeking wisdom, to reflect on our own experiences, and try to find what truly gives our lives meaning.
And to be okay with the fact that maybe there isn't one perfect answer.
Maybe. Because the journey itself, that searching, that questioning, maybe that's where we find the real gold.
For a book that starts out vanity, vanity, all is vanity, there's a surprisingly hopeful message there.
There is. It's like an invitation to embrace life in all its messy, complicated, beautiful glory.
I love that. Well said. So to our listener, we hope this deep dive into Ecclesiastes has given you something to chew on.
And maybe inspired you to, I don't know, maybe pick up the book again, see what new insights you can find.
Because as the preacher reminds us, there's always something new to learn, even in the oldest wisdom. Thanks for joining us.